citizens know that. But the Jews didn't care. They didn't care about law. They didn't care about their own law. All they wanted to was get Paul, because Paul, what had he had done? He had started riot after riot after riot, because he was proclaiming not only Jesus Christ, but that Jesus Christ had risen from the dead over and over and over again. That made people upset. It made the Pharisees upset because they didn't acknowledge Christ as the Messiah. It made the Sadducees upset because they did not believe in a resurrection at all. It created fighting, internal fighting between the Jews. They didn't know who to fight, and finally they found an enemy. You know, sometimes contrary factions can come together when they have a common enemy. You ever seen that happen? People that don't like each other can be friends for a while because all of a sudden now they have a common enemy. And that's what was going on here. We see this happening over and over again in Paul's life. But you remember in John 7 when Jesus, when the leaders of the religious leaders wanted to get Jesus and they wouldn't, Nicodemus steps in and says there must be a trial. Over and over in the Jewish mind and in the Roman mind, a trial is necessary before you convict somebody of anything. But the Jews didn't care about that at this time. So Festus, in his effort to take charge, he's going to take him to Caesarea, or he's going to place him in Caesarea. He's not going to bring him down to Jerusalem. And he's going to say, I'm going to go up there in a couple days. Come on with me. You just come on. You know, you can come with me. If you're really so set on him being this guilty, you can bring charges at that time. And I'll show you who's in charge, by the way. Now, Felix is off the scene now. Festus has been put in his place. He is the governor. Now, Festus doesn't live very long. People say he lived about 2 years after he became governor, and then he died. I guess because he didn't do well with the Jews either. Ananias, who was the chief priest in the past, is now nowhere to be found. He's been replaced. And Tertullus is now no longer found. The famous lawyer who had charged Paul in the past is nowhere to be found now. So if you look at verses 6 through 12 in Acts chapter 25, they talk about the tactics that they changed. You find the Jewish leaders that are a pack of wolves. They're shaking their fist at Paul. And poor Festus, he's thinking, this is ridiculous. I just come into this office 3 days ago or 10 days ago or 12 days ago, and all I'm having is problems. Problem after problem. These Jews are just a bunch of problems. And so is this guy Paul. Why can't I get rid of them? So they're a pack of wolves. And they change their charges. Look at what it says in verse 14. We started verse 14. It says, they stayed there many days. Felix laid Paul's case before them, saying, there was a man... not that way. Verse 8, Paul argued in his defense. Verse 7, and when he had arrived, the Jews who had come down to Jerusalem stood around bringing many serious charges against him that they could not prove. In other words, they had no evidence. They had nothing that they could prove anything that was what they were saying was right about Paul. But look what happens then. It says, Paul argued in his defense, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. In other words, he has not done anything that is wrong at all. And he's still in prison. And Paul's claiming his innocence over and over again. He hasn't done anything against the temple. Remember the first charge back in chapter 21 was that he defiled what? The temple, right? How do you defile a temple? You bring Gentiles into the temple. He says, I'm innocent. Remember another charge that he didn't keep or doesn't honor or is not sensitive to the Jewish way of life or even the laws of Judaism? He says, I have not defiled the law in one bit. And then if they're going to charge him with something against the Roman Empire, he said, listen, I have not done anything against Caesar at all. Now, Festus, it says he wanted to do the Jews a favor. If you look at verse 9, it says, do you wish to go to Jerusalem? Now, Paul knows if he goes to Jerusalem, he's probably going to die. He's probably going to get killed. But Festus is trying to find a way that he can get out of the situation. And he says, one of the best ways I can do is get him into Jerusalem and maybe someone will just kill him. That's what I believe is going on here. But Paul, and when a governor asks you, would you like to go to Jerusalem? He's not asking you. He's telling you. But Paul comes back and he says, listen, he says, I stand before Caesar's tribunal where I ought to be tried. And he goes through this, he says, listen, I don't accept that, and I'm not going to Jerusalem because I appealed to Caesar. And once he appealed to Caesar, guess what? When a Roman citizen appealed to Caesar he went. And that's what, after consulting Festus, decided as well. Paul's Roman citizenship was something that I believe, if you look in his life, was an amazing thing. God orchestrated Paul's citizenship. You realize that only Paul could have gone to Rome this way? Think about the spread of the gospel here. And that Paul was going to announce the gospel to leaders, and that the only one who could really get himself to Rome without dying in proclaiming the gospel was really the Apostle Paul. He was the only one with Roman citizenship that would protect him. Who planned that? It was God. God was taking the gospel not only from Judea, Samaria, but to the remotest parts of the world. And if you look at the story over and over of Paul's journeys and his adventure, God is the one that's moving Paul. Paul doesn't have a program for missions right now. Paul didn't say, hey, let's have a program. No, he's simply going out sharing the gospel, and God is directing him. We got to understand that God is going to accomplish His gospel purpose in our lives. And He's going to do that in great ways. A couple weeks ago, I believe that as Larry was preaching, he was talking about comfort. And one of the things that I remember he said about comfort was that Christians are most comforted when they are proclaiming the gospel. I think that's what you said. We are most comforted when we are doing the things that God has commanded us to do. We gain comfort even in the midst of difficulty, even in the midst of trouble and trial. When we are doing those things that God has commanded us to do, we are the most comforted people in the world. Because we know that God is working those things. God is seeing that His mission and plan does not fail. And so Festus thought that he had everything going his way. Okay, go appeal to Caesar. Get out of here. But he forgot one thing. As a new governor, going into the Supreme Court, so to speak, he had to have charges. And Paul and Festus now all of a sudden doesn't have any charges, and he's going to go to Nero right now, who's the Caesar, and he's going to say, I have nothing to say. And that would be an embarrassment for Festus. So Festus is not off the hook. He doesn't have any charges. Now, verses 13 through 22, look at what happens. Festus has been stewing for a couple days. And lo and behold, Agrippa, King Agrippa II, and Bernice come in. Now, Bernice had been married to a governor of a small area of Lebanon before, and I guess they had split up, and now they're living together. And the rumor mill says that Bernice, Agrippa's sister, and them are really very intimate. And so there's this rumor that is going about him. But he comes in, and Festus goes, here's someone I can use. Here's someone that knows. Because Agrippa is the man who would have been king of Judea if he wasn't so young when his father died. See, his father is King Agrippa the First. His father is Herod the Great, that was alive during the time of Jesus. You see, his father, King Agrippa the First, died because he accepted praise and did not give credit to God in chapter 12 of Acts. And worms ate him up. It said that God killed him through the use of worms because he didn't acknowledge God when people praised him.